For years, I'd heard gamers talk about the 13th Age fantasy role playing game in quite glowing terms, with the focus on player characters and how they interact and tie into the game world, mixing storytelling with crunch and magic and monsters that matter are some of the calling cards of 13th Age. Well, recently I shared my review of the Player's Handbook for the second edition of 13th Age, and you might be wondering, how does the Game Master's Guide stack up? Well, you're going to find out because I'm going to be sharing my review right after this. Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I'll be sharing my review of the 13th Age Second Edition Gamemaster's Guide from Pelgrane Press. This 252-page hardcover with PDF carries an MSRP of $54.95. If you want to grab just the PDF alone, you can do so over at DriveThruRPG for $29.95. Having said all that, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got the Game Master's Guide for 13th Age 2nd Edition. A couple of things to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, the fine folks over at Pelgrane Press were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. It's important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a really good feel for what you're going to find inside. First thing we'll do is take a look at the credit pages. That's right. There are multiple pages with credits here. So we'll focus on these two. A lot of people worked very hard to bring this second edition of 13th Age to life. So let's give credit where credit is due. Then, of course, we hit the thank yous to all of the crowdfunding backers. So we've got that. So, of course, this is the second of two volumes that you need in order to play and run 13th Age Second Edition. Obviously enough, this is Game Master facing. This is going to contain a gazetteer of the Dragon Empire, a short section about how to run 13th Age. It's all about 25 pages. Then the largest section of the book, which is going to be our monster bestiary, will also have some information about treasure. We've got an introductory adventure, and then quite a few different appendices will wrap up this volume. One thing I want to mention before we really dive in is with the review I did of the Player's Handbook for the second edition of 13th Age, I got comments on the video essentially asking, why didn't I mention the escalation die for combat? I sort of forgot about it, to be honest, when I was doing the review, but also I didn't really think it was that big a deal. Now, of course, with the escalation die, it's used in combat and it activates in the second round of combat. It's a six-sided die. It's going to start off at 1. That is going to be the modifier that the player characters will have added to their rolls. And it'll go up to 6. It maxes out at 6. So essentially in combat, the player characters start off a little bit behind the 8 ball because the monsters are a little bit tougher, but then they build momentum as that escalation die increases. Now, there are some abilities for the player characters which activate based on that escalation die, but there aren't like a ton. It's not like every single feat or ability is based off of that. So I got to be honest, I didn't think it was that big a deal, probably because there isn't a ton of attention paid to it in the Player's Handbook. In fact, It's really not even mentioned in this for the Game Master's Guide. It is mentioned on the back cover, but there isn't really a bunch of information in here about how to utilize the escalation die because it's relatively simple. It's just a modifier that's being added to the player rolls during combat. That's it. But I did want to mention it because I think some folks who are very, very familiar with first edition were worried that maybe it wasn't part of it anymore, or maybe it wasn't really involved that much in combat anymore. No, it's still there. Like I said, I mainly forgot about it. And secondarily, I didn't think it was that big a deal. In fact, I got to be honest, as far as the monsters in the bestiary section here, some of their attacks that they'll utilize are based on their attack die roll. I thought that's a bigger deal than the escalation die. But then again, that's just me. So we're going to start off with the gazetteer. It's going to give us a breakdown of the Dragon Empire. And it's also very important to keep in mind that the way 13th Age is designed is for the Game Master and the players to really make their marks on this game world, to customize this game world to fit what they're looking to get out of a role-playing game and a fantasy role-playing campaign. So there are a variety of different icons, very important movers and shakers in the Dragon Empire. You might utilize some of them in your campaign while pretty much leaving others in the background or maybe not even on screen at all. So it's completely up to the Game Master and the players. Now, we do get a lot of good information about the age and the various different ages prior to the 13th Age. But once again, a lot of this can be adjusted to meet the requirements or desires of the players and the Game Master. We get into the running the game section here. And to be honest with you, this is more tips and advice on how you're going to put together your adventures, your campaign, your arcs, because arcs make up a campaign. Talk about you can put together a 10 arc campaign. As far as combat goes, it's also important to keep in mind in 13th Age, you're not going to see as much combat in the adventures as you would, say, in D&D or Pathfinder. So as an example, an arc isn't necessarily an adventure. It's not necessarily a session either. It is kind of a period of time. So you might have what people would consider to be an adventure, maybe take up 2 arcs, or maybe only 1 arc. But the way you'll build these sorts of adventures will be upon, are you going to have 4 battles or 3 battles? Because player characters don't get to refresh their abilities and get their magic spells back just by taking a short rest or a long rest. They have to make it through the arc before they can regain everything. There are certain ways for them to get some things back, but they can't essentially recharge their characters, heal up, get all their spells, get all their abilities back online just by resting for a few hours, which I like quite a lot. I got to be honest, I think it's super cool. I love the fact that 13th Age isn't just cramming in all these combat encounters like you would see in most Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons adventures, and that's fine. There are a lot of people out there who just love to just have one combat encounter after another. That's not necessarily how I run games. That's not necessarily how I enjoy playing games either. I like action. I like excitement. I also like role-playing and exploration and investigation. I don't want to just be chucking dice and always looking at being involved in combat. So I really do dig the fact this is a role-playing game that is focused more on detail than just murder hoboing your way through an adventure. Definitely like that a ton. So we will get advice on how to build battles, how to balance battles, how sometimes you don't necessarily need to balance something out. It's okay for your player characters to have to run away to survive to see another day. It's not necessarily a must that every single battle encounter is going to be balanced so that the player characters can defeat it. We'll also get information about how to create various different hazards based on your environment and such. We also have the varying DCs that need to be met or exceeded based upon the tier of the adventuring. So we have adventurer tier, we have champion tier, we have epic tier. And that's as your player characters will get more experience as they're leveling up, they are going to move into different tiers, which are also going to make achieving different things a little more difficult as far as the number that needs to be rolled. Now, of course, your player characters are going to have bigger modifiers and everything else. So it's all going to kind of come out in the wash. But still, I like how we do have the skill checks based upon the tier of the player characters. Now, as far as the most page space of the book, that is devoted to the bestiary. So we have all the various different monsters. We have monster lists. We have the monster entries. Now, something that I thought was pretty interesting too is the fact that all of these entries can be utilized more as a template for monsters as opposed to just specifically monsters. So as an example here, we've got animals. We've got the dire rat. Well, you could use this information to create other monsters of kind of that challenge, that same level of challenge, and tweak the numbers a little bit, tweak the abilities a little bit, but it's giving you a really nice starting spot to begin with. So for some game masters out there, they might be taking a look at the entries here and find, wow, you know, for being essentially the 13th Age Second Edition bestiary, there aren't a huge number of entries. There are, I think, 100 off the top of my head, which is still a pretty good number. But we also have information that goes in depth about creating monsters, using monsters as a template, tweaking monsters for challenge ratings and such. As far as the entries themselves, we're going to get information about the creature. We're also going to get mostly info about what they do in combat. As I already mentioned, a lot of these are going to have abilities that will activate or attacks they can utilize based on the attack roll that is made for that creature. Some of them also have nastier specials. So as the game master, if you want to make that entity even more challenging, you can use the nastier specials also. Something else that's kind of cool, as far as the stat block, essentially, this gives you an idea of how does this creature or NPC, monster, what have you, stack up to others in that range. So is their armor class higher? Is their physical defense higher? Do they have more hit points? And so forth. I thought that was kind of interesting. So should point out production quality. Paper stock, very, very nice. Like the paper stock quite a bit. This is a stitched binding, so this should hold up rather nicely. I know when we were taking a peek through the player's handbook, I had mentioned how the artwork for the player's handbook was kind of uneven. We see that a little bit here, but I will say that the Game Master's Guide kind of relies a little bit more on line artwork, and the line artwork is, for the most part, really nicely done. So I like the artwork just a little bit more in the Game Master's Guide than I did with the player's handbook. Then we'll get into the information about building your own monsters, which I thought this was very, very useful, because one of the biggest things you're going to start off with creating a monster is, what is its role? What does it do? What is its purpose. And of course, if you're creating various different types of a particular creature, like a kobold would be, what role within the group does that monster entry serve? So I like that quite a lot. We get into treasure, a lot of information about making treasure matter in your games, as opposed to just being a bunch of junk that you're going to weigh down your player characters with, stuff that they might never, ever use. We also get information about creating magic items. And then we're going to wrap up with an introductory adventure, which I actually like the introductory adventure, but there's something about it that I think is kind of odd, almost silly. So the player characters are going to be escorting this scholar who is researching these living dungeons. As opposed to a dungeon, we have living dungeons. I think just the name kind of makes it sound silly, because what they really are kind of dimensional rifts or time rifts. And as a game master, I would probably play off of that these are some sort of temporal rifts that appear that can get bigger, because that's basically what these living dungeons will do, is they'll get larger if they aren't defeated. Like I said, I would just kind of go with, it's some sort of a temporal thing, right? As opposed to, it's a living dungeon. Because I'm thinking living dungeon, living, breathing dungeon, or like Roll for Combat. One of their Battle Zoo books had a player character class, the living dungeon. That's what I'm thinking of. That's what pops in my head. Then we're going to wrap up. We've got a bunch of different appendices using the first edition resources, some optional rules that game masters and players might want to utilize. We've got some references to earlier resources. So I like this. I thought this was pretty cool. I got to be honest, I didn't realize there had been so much support for the first edition of 13th Age. I really hope that Pelgrane Press plans on supporting this new edition as much, if not more, than the first edition of 13th Age. All right, so that is a peek inside the Game Master's Guide for 13th Age Second Edition. Swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. I think it's pretty obvious. I really like this second edition of 13th Age. I have no experience prior with 13th Age, so this was all new to me. And I got to say, I really like the mentality of this role-playing game. I really appreciate the fact that this is not a role-playing game that the main focus is on combat. It is not a murder hobo sort of role-playing game. It doesn't have the mentality that a chapter of an adventure path should have 30 combat encounters in it. Combat is infrequent, but when it breaks out, it is exciting, it is fast-moving, it is deadly. That's where the crunch comes in, although combat is also streamlined. So combats shouldn't be taking 30, 40, 50 minutes to complete at your game table. They should move relatively quickly and focus on all the good stuff, as opposed to just the roll and repeat like we see in a lot of other fantasy role-playing games. I love the fact that the game world is really customizable. I mean, you've got your building blocks there for the game master and the players to create their own version of the Dragon Empire. Of course, it's all going to depend on the sort of adventuring that the players and game master are interested in, which is going to lead you to various different icons that you'll focus on in your campaign world, whereas other game masters and players might focus on other icons for their version of the Dragon Empire. I like how we only have 25 pages devoted to running the game in the Game Master's Guide, because everything you pretty much needed was already in the player's handbook. So the running the game portion is really focused on customizing those icons, building battles, making battles fun and exciting, how to create hazards and other challenges of the environment, and how to pretty much put together skill checks for the players. That's pretty much it. As far as the bestiary, I think the bestiary is really nicely done, packed with content. Even though the number of entries isn't massive, they are going to give you starting points to kind of use those entries as templates to build your own monsters, or to kind of convert monsters from other fantasy role-playing games to 13th Age. The introductory adventure is fine. I thought it was a pretty good adventure. I just think the concept of the living dungeon is sort of silly, so I wouldn't use that. But all in all, it is a good tale to introduce your players to the game, as well as to the Dragon Empire also. All in all, I have to give 13th Age really my highest recommendation of role-playing games by saying I would be interested in running this. That's how I determine if a role-playing game is really cool, really good, or if it's just, it's all right. Yeah, maybe I'd run it. Yeah, it's fine. No, I think the second edition of 13th Age is really nicely done. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give the second edition 13th Age Gamemaster's Guide a 9 out of 10. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like the Gaming Gang and would like to support the outlet, you can do so in a few ways. First, by utilizing our affiliate links to the One Bookshelf sites. And it's pretty simple to do. All you have to do is visit thegaminggang.com, click on one of our banner ads. That way, if you happen to make a purchase at, say, DriveThruRPG, I get 5% of that sale. You can also make a one-time donation by way of PayPal, and even become a member of our Patreon. You will find links to all of that down in the show notes. Also in the show notes, you're going to find an invite link to our Discord server. It's absolutely free to sign up, so be sure to hang with the gang over on Discord. If you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already, and if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell. And if you ring the bell, click on all notifications, because it'll not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central, as I bring you the latest in tabletop role-playing game news and more. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer, and until I see you next time, certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.